3 minutes.
Very short. Mr. Speaker, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Deputy Speaker, leaders, invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity accorded me this morning to be one of the very few select speakers on this occasion, the second anniversary of the 8th Assembly. Without prejudice to the very brilliant submissions of the other speakers before me, I'd like to point out that this anniversary is a day that fills me with mixed feelings, a sense of triumph and elation, trepidation and foreboding, and a deep urge for stabilization and rectification. There is a widely imbibed broad consensus that the legislature is necessary in a democracy and that it is the only institution that is the voice of the people in government. It is the bastion of our democracy and it's fundamental to the legitimacy of our government. Sometimes people who have a legislature, we deride our legislature and we even bemoan its existence until we are reminded that it was the quest for democratic institutions such as this, our legislature, that would represent the interest of all the citizens that led to several uprisings around the world, and most recently, the uprising in North Africa, popularly referred to as the Arab Springs in 2019, a sad situation that had a death toll of over 3,500 people. Pivotal as our legislature is to our system of government, our legislative institutions have been considerably weaker than they should be. The twin legacies of colonialism and militarism have conspired to ensure that authoritarian regimes, when replaced by democratic institutions, requires long-term commitments, education, and hard work for all true democratic institutions and practices such as oversight, lawmaking, appropriations, representation to take root. We have made considerable progress in the struggle to establish independent, sustainable legislative institutions. 18 years on, the question is, has our legislature grown alongside our democracy? The answer is unfortunately no. The legislature still has not found a comfortable place in the tri-party spectre of democratic governance. The problems facing individual legislators and legislature are tetra-headed, as highlighted by the keynote speakers. We battle high attrition rate, weak legislative support systems, weak institutional memory. We also battle perception problems. It is a known fact that the average citizens view the average politician with skepticism. After many years of totalitarian government, with the absence of the legislature, there is scant, if any, understanding of the functions of the legislature. This perception is not helped by the democratization of information, the social media and mainstream media entrenching that perception. The expectations of the legislature and legislators are sometimes unrealistic. The perception of elected representatives is that, as a Caesar's wife, we should be beyond reproach, and the knee-jerk reaction of questioning the relevance of the legislature when these high expectations are not met. Add that to the problem of our institution jostling for survival and relevance in the political space, skewed against its very existence. Our constitutional duties have become questions about what are the powers of our appropriation, what are questions about our power of oversight, questions about delegated legislation, questions about the strength of our past resolutions have become resounding and frequent from quarters you would expect would know better. But these are generic. Now is the time for me to get granular. I have spent 10 years, today marks my 10th anniversary in the legislature, and I feel that makes me eminently qualified to speak to these issues. And when people complain about the composition of the legislature and the quality of legislators, I say to them that we're reflective of the larger Nigerian society. Today, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, I've never seen a Nigeria that is more fractured or fragmented, where nepotism, tribal politics, religion takes center stage, where hate speeches, cries of secession, calls for restructuring and eviction rent the air. Hitherto, the one thing you could say for the Nigerian legislator and the legislature was that we were unapologetic patriots. Even though people rode on platforms of different political parties and came from far-flung areas of our great country, we came to the National Assembly and swore to protect, defend, and uphold one constitution and one country, the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It was in that spirit that the untried, untested doctrine of necessity was born when our dear country danced dangerously on the brink. It was in that same spirit that the law of emergency rule was passed for the Northeast when Boko Haram threatened the territorial integrity of our great country. Again, it was that same spirit that drove the taking over of state legislatures from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south when our collective democracy was threatened. It was in that same spirit, my dear colleagues, Mr. Speaker and invited guests, that appropriations and supplementary appropriations were passed in the interest of our dear country. Mr. Speaker, sir, this parliament stood as band of brothers, shoulder to shoulder, when this National Assembly was tear-gassed. And we came back and we sat and we took decisions in the interest of our great country. It was that spirit of nationalistic pride, cohesion, inclusive growth, and responsiveness that Parliament stepped in when the rest of the country threw up their arms in confusion, frustration, and exasperation. And now today, as the threads again that hold us together are starting to erode in the national discourse, this again is time for us to show responsive leadership, to rise above parochial interests, to be fair-minded, inclusive, not only to sections, tribes, religion, or parts of the country, but also to remember the tenets of the Constitution that we swore to uphold, and also to recognize the gender agenda. I have watched Honorable Femi Gbaja and Honorable Leo Ogo speak copiously from the Constitution as they have spoken about our cohesion. Mr. Speaker, sir, as a woman, I want us to remember the gender agenda, that 51% of our population deserves at least 35% representation as we seek to build a more unified, integrated country. Finally, Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, every morning we say a prayer, and I want us, my brothers who are fasting and my Christian brothers, to take our minds back to that prayer, 1 minute, and remember the words of the prayers that we say every day. Almighty God, ruler of heaven and earth, we beseech thee to inspire and guide all our counsels and actions, so that we may always walk in the path of love, charity, and honesty to one another. Help us with your grace to do only those things that will promote the unity, prosperity, and happiness of our great country. Thank you very much.
Before we take on the next speaker, let me recognize the distinguished senators who walked into the chambers just as I was rounding up the recognition.